It's also extraordinarily difficult to find this information. You remember from
Yeah.
especially some of the stuff I did from Ballotpedia and stuff you did for Ballotpedia. When we're trying to find stuff about local level politics, it can be
Yeah.
extraordinarily difficult to find this information. You're going to New York City or Chicago or Los Angeles. Okay, yeah, those are the biggest cities, so they're gonna. Then if you're finding something like I don't know Gary, Indiana, or something like that, not picking on you, Gary, just as an example. Uh, but yeah, so many of these other places, or like even my town is that I live in is a pretty big town. It's not incorporated, but it's a pretty good sized town. It's really blown up in recent years, but it still can be extraordinarily difficult to find information on that too. And the information's just not there. Or I remember one particular project I did for Ballotpedia where I was looking for every single county's elections website, if they even had one. And some of them looked like they were
Mm.
made in like early 2000s GeoCities. Like, what is George W. Bush still the president here? What are we doing here? Have you updated this website recently? But yeah, you're right. That is a really interesting way of putting it in those little buckets, and actually makes a good segue into this next question. These are sort of buckets too. So when we look at the state of civics education, I think it's useful to break it down into a students and classroom category and then an adults and continuing education category. And a lot of times when we talk about civics education, we're usually just talking about the former, but not enough on the latter. But we'll break these into two different questions.
Mm.
So they have similar yet also unique obstacles facing them. But in your opinion, for students in our schools, what are 2 to 3 of the biggest issues facing civics education for them, and which ones do you bring up in your book?
Um, so to me, I think the two biggest issues that we're facing when we talk about civic education at the K through 12 level for students is kind of like both of these things are sort of one. We don't take it seriously enough. And the sort of evidence that we don't take it seriously enough is the lack of requirements. So you would think, as
Yeah.
a citizen of a democracy, that in order to graduate from high school, you should have at some point have been required to learn about civic education, to have civic classes, civic instruction, in order to receive your high school diploma. There are lots of things that we require students to have, and these requirements vary by state. But I do talk a little bit about this in the book. I have some of the statistics in front of me. And last I checked, it looks like 40 states and Washington, D.C. actually require some sort of civic instruction in order to graduate from high school. So, I mean, I guess if we ignore the other 10 states, that's good because that's the majority. But the idea is that 10 states in the United States don't even require you to have any civic instruction at all in order to graduate from high school. So that's kind of a problem. But then if we look a little bit deeper into those 40 states, it turns out that only 9 of them actually require whatever that required civic course is to be a full year long or more. So what we're talking about is a situation in the United States today where 10 states don't require you to have any civic education at all in order to graduate from high school. And then 30 additional states only require you to have 1 semester, which for those of you who have been out of school for a long time is only about 3.5 months of civic instruction
Yeah.
in order to graduate. So that is an indication to students and also an indication to the rest of Americans that we just don't care enough, right, about this particular subject. We don't make this a priority. So I think that is the biggest problem that I see. It really sort of feeds into the next question, that you said you were going to ask about adult education, right? Because what age are most students when they graduate from high school? 17 or 18 years old, right? And 18 is the age they become eligible to vote. So what we have is a bunch of voters who we are not preparing adequately to participate in politics and to basically play this huge role in keeping our system going. Um, and so we have evidence that we're not really preparing them. So it's not just about the lack of instruction, but it's about what that lack of instruction means. So because of that, we actually have statistics that are showing us that students are not learning nearly enough. They're not prepared adequately. So there is an organization called NAEP, which stands for the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And are a part of the government. Their job is to basically collect information about how students across the country are doing in various subject areas. And so they administer these assessment tests to like a nationally representative sample of students in elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools on different topics. And they do this every year and then they report the results. We actually call them, for short, we call them the nation's report card. Right. And so they're sort of our way to tell how we're doing in education generally at the elementary, middle, and high school level. So they give all these tests out to all these different schools across the country, and then they take all the student scores and they break them down into three categories. The categories are proficient, basic, and below basic, which I think below basic
Cool.
actually sounds kind of mean, but those are the three
Yeah,
categories that they choose.
yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
actually I talk about this a little bit in the book. I actually brought the numbers with me so I could go over them with you. So the most recent Civics assessment that they've done for high school seniors. I mean, because they've done it more recently at the elementary school and middle school level, but we're talking about voters, so I think high school seniors is appropriate. The most recent one was in 2010. And in 2010, what Nate found was that only 24% of high school seniors were considered proficient in civic education. So that's less than a quarter of graduating high school seniors that achieved the level of proficiency. As a matter of fact, more students in 2010 were actually considered to be below basic than proficient. I think the below basic number was 36. So you might be thinking, oh, wow, maybe something really bad happened in 2010 and students just weren't paying attention. But no, when you go back and you look at the scores before that, these numbers actually remain remarkably stable. So if you go back to 2006, it's 27% proficient and 34% below basic. If you go back to 1998, it's 26% proficient, 35% below basic. So basically, what we're seeing is not only are we not
Wow.
adequately preparing our high school students to participate in life, in civic life. But we haven't been preparing them for quite some time. This is not something that just started that's new. This is something that's been going on for a while and it's remained pretty stable. So if what we're seeing with these numbers is that high school students are scoring this low, well then what do we think happens when those high school students graduate and they go out into the world and then they become regular voters? They have that same low level of civic knowledge, right? They're unprepared for the very important role of keeping our system going that we expect them to play. And so that is, that's sort of the issue that we're struggling with here when it comes to what our students facing, and then it feeds directly into the situation that we're facing when we're looking at adults.
Yeah, I don't think you can disagree with the idea that we don't take it seriously enough for our students. Obviously, the statistics you brought up are a clear example of that, but just in general, as we can look at how just generally how well prepared they are, how much people participate, how much people feel that they know about politics, that internal political efficacy. Now, how exactly to address it, yeah, there's a discussion to be had about like, well, then you got to take if you're going to put it in school, then you might have to take an elective out, for example, even though we have a
Hmm.
bunch of electives that kids can have. So I'm not going to pretend that I know the exact answer for that, but there definitely needs to be something more concrete put in our high schools and even arguably middle school as well. So I definitely agree with that.